Chair, we're now live.
Good evening and welcome to this virtual Development Control Committee, and welcome to those members of the public watching on the Council's YouTube channel. I'd ask members in the meeting, or everybody in the meeting, if you can please put your microphones on mute when you're not speaking so that we don't get feedback. Thank you. Also, mobile phones, please ensure mobile phones are switched off or in silent mode. This meeting is being broadcast live on the Council's YouTube channel. A copy of the recording will be available on the channel shortly after the meeting. Members and officers are reminded to keep their microphones on mute unless they are called to speak. Members can indicate that they wish to speak using the meeting chat function. Please don't use the chat function to ask questions of officers or councillors because they will not be answered. It's just for requesting to speak. Thank you. Quasi-judicial. Members of the public are reminded that the planning application process is constrained by the need to have regard of current planning policy at national, regional and local levels, as well as all other material planning considerations, including case law precedent. The decision-making process is often described as quasi-judicial because local planning authorities have to act reasonably within the bounds of planning law and the above considerations, and are not free to determine planning applications simply because of the weight of public opinion. So who's who here this evening? The elected members, the councillors who are present remotely this evening, are members of this committee. I think someone's got a microphone on, and will decide what action this committee takes on the issues it considers. We also have a number of officers present whose cameras are switched off and are here to advise the committee on issues before it. I'll now introduce councillors and officers of the meeting. So I'll just do a roll call, and if you can just say good evening or present, that would be great. So Councillor, go through in alphabetical order. I think it's in alphabetical order. Councillor Roy Aurora.
Good evening, Chair.
Good evening. And Councillor Kim Bailey.
Good evening, Chair.
And Councillor Mark Banyan.
Good evening.
And Councillor David Cunningham.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good Councillor Lorraine Dunstone.
Good evening, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Simon Edwards. Are you unable? I think Councillor Simon Edwards is having a problem unmuting. He is in now. I can see him, and he can't unmute. Maybe you've got time at this point, Simon. If you log out and log back in.
Oh, here I am. Good evening.
I know you're loud and clear now. Good evening, Simon. Councillor Leslie Heap.
Good evening, Chair.
Good evening. Councillor Rebecca Moore.
Evening.
Evening, and I'm Malcolm Self. I'm chairing this committee. We've also got
I'm here as well, Councillor Archer.
Oh, I do apologise, and you were missed off last time. Somehow
I was.
Yes, I will update that list, Chair. Apologies for that.
Thank you, Sam. If you can update the list, because it's not very good when we miss Steph off. Councillor, the most important person here is Councillor Steph Archer. Good evening. Sorry about that again. We've also got Councillor Ian George in the meeting at the moment, who's requested to speak on the application for Coombe Lane West. Good evening, Ian.
Good evening.
Good evening. Officers, we've got Sam Nichols, Democratic Services. We've got Barry Lomax, Head of Development Management. Harsha's not with us at the moment, I don't think. Is that right, Barry?
I am.
Oh, sorry, it's your picture. Well, your lovely picture's not there. Harsha Bandya, who's Principal Planner, and Tim Naylor, Assistant Director of Strategic Planning and Infrastructure. There's a registration scheme. This is public participation. There's a registration scheme for residents and applicants wishing to participate on planning applications. that are considered by this committee. Members of the public who are registered to speak will be contacted at the appropriate time to notify them to join the meeting. I won't read the next bit because I think all the registered speakers we're expecting this evening are already online. So welcome to you as well. You'll get an introduction when we get to your bit of the meeting. There is two councillors have registered to speak in addition this evening. There is also a provision under Procedure Rule 27 within the council's constitution to permit councillors who do not sit on a committee to address the meeting if permission is granted by this committee. We've received requests from Councillors George and Felchikoff-Sumner this evening to speak on the applications at Coombe Lane West and Fife Road respectively. Are members happy to permit this, or do we need to go to a vote? I think we'll all be happy to permit that. But if you put your name in the chat function now, which I'm just putting up in case you're not happy with that. And there's no names appearing, so I take that as passed. We're happy for those two councillors to speak at the appropriate time. Thank you. That takes us to apologies for absence and attendance of substitute members, and I'll pass over to Sam for that. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies received from Councillor Ryder-Mills.
Thank you very much. And minutes of the meeting of this committee that held on the 2nd of September have been published. Are members happy to approve those minutes? If you're not, could you indicate in the chat function, and I'll pause just in case any names come up. They were only circulated today, but hopefully you've had a chance to see them. But if anybody hasn't seen them or you wish to raise anything, you put your name in the chat function. And I take that as passed unanimously. So the minutes of the last meeting are approved. Declarations of interest. Members are asked to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests and any other non-pecuniary interests, i.e. personal interests, relevant to items on this agenda. Do any members have any declarations of interest to declare? And I'll pause to allow you to put your name in the chat function. Or I think I've got everybody on screen. You can wave your hand, and there's no waving of hands, and there's no names coming up in the chat function. So we'll take that as no declarations of interest. Thank you very much. And that takes us to the meat of this evening, and we've got two applications. The application for Fife Road and the 9-storey co-living block. We have no registered speakers. There were no registered objectors to speak, and if there's no registered objectors speaking, then applicants can't speak either. So there's no speakers on that application, whereas there are speakers registered for the application on Coombe Lane West. So we will reverse the order and take the planning application for Coombe Lane West, 17 to 19 Coombe Lane West first. This is application number 19/03167, and it's 17 to 19 Coombe Lane West, and it's for the demolition of two existing dwelling houses and the erection of a part 3-storey, part 2-storey and part 1-storey nursing home comprising 67 bedrooms with associated car parking, landscaping, refuse and bicycle store. And so I'm going to turn now to Head of Planning, Barry Lomax, to present this item. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You should be able to see the presentation on your screen. Is that correct?
I've certainly got it on my screen. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
So the application first this evening is at 17 to 19 Coombe Lane West, and it's for the demolition of two existing dwelling houses and an erection of a part 3-storey, part 2-storey nursing home comprising 67 bedrooms with associated parking, landscaping, refuse and bicycle store. So on screen now you can see the application site outlined in red, showing two large family dwelling houses in two relatively large plots. Here we see the application site from an aerial photograph. And then we see a bird's eye view looking to the rear of the application site, showing both sites as indicated on screen. This slide rather, just shows some of the constraints in the area. The site has a couple of tree preservation orders. It has the Hampton Court Palace water supply running through the part of the site, so an area of archaeological significance, and the site falls within the Kingston Hill, Coombe Hill strategic area of special character, a non-designated heritage asset. Here we have some photographs of the site taken from Coombe Lane West, looking into the site, and then we move into the rear garden of one of the properties looking around the site. And then we have a front elevation of number 19, and then a rear elevation of number 19. And then a view from number 19 looking southwest. And then we have the existing elevation and plan. So the existing front elevation shows a building of around 10.5 metres with a gap of 1.9 metres to the one property and 10 metres to the other. At the bottom, we see the existing floor plans, and then moving through the floors of the properties to the first floor and then into the roof plans. So the application is slightly more detailed. It's for the demolition of the 2 dwelling houses we've just seen and the erection of a Part 3, Part 2-storey nursing home comprising 67 bedrooms with associated landscaping refuse and bicycle storage. The 67 bedrooms is a form of housing delivery as per the council's requirement to deliver 5 years worth of housing land supply. However, there is a ratio which means the 67 beds equate to 37 conventional housing units. The total area of the site is 0.3 hectares. There are 14 car parking spaces proposed, 2 of which would be accessible spaces. There are 10 cycle spaces proposed and a total outdoor amenity space of 1,300 square metres. The proposal would hit a BREEAM of excellent and a reduction of 42% of CO2 reduction over the baseline figure, with the shortfall presenting itself as a financial contribution of £127,800. Taking you now to the proposed elevations. This is the proposed street frontage. You'd see that the proposal has been designed so as to mimic 2 large family dwelling houses, commensurate with the style of properties being large within the immediate area around the site. Here we have in detail a detailed north elevation and south elevation, front and back, showing the maximum height of the properties fronting Coombe Lane West to be commensurate to the properties which they seek to replace. And then moving around to the 2 side elevations, you see from the side elevations that there is a 2-storey rear extension, which as it moves into the rear garden, drops down to a 1-storey extension. We have some proposed CGI images. Here you see the proposed in and out proposal for vehicles entering and leaving the site. So first slide being in, second out. And then we see a proposed CGI of the rear. What you see on the left-hand side of the screen is the proposed extension with the photovoltaic cells on the roof. Here we have a plan showing the key measurements to the boundaries of the site. And then as we move through the property, this is the proposed ground floor plan showing the bedrooms, each of which proposed to meet the CQC standards, access to amenity space with a sensory garden, and there are communal dining and eating facilities within the proposed care home. As we move through, we terminate at a crown roof. So I take you now to some of the key issues. So first one being housing delivery. So as I said, this is a form of housing, and that is ratioed out to be an equivalent of 37 dwellings. And at the time the council is unable to demonstrate a 5 years supply of housing land, this is a consideration of substantial weight. Looking at affordable housing, this type of accommodation, a C2 use, is not or does not fall under the requirements for affordable homes. And that is set out in the report in the legal agreement section, some of the key attributes that need to be captured to ensure that it remains a care home and as such doesn't fall under the requirements for affordable housing. Impact on residential amenity. This slide again shows those distance from boundaries, showing that there's sufficient distance from boundaries on all sides so as not to create an overbearing, overlooking impact on neighbouring properties. On screen now you see the shadow diagram taken from taken above the property at different times of the day on the spring equinox. So you see existing at 7 a.m, proposed at 7 a.m, showing little difference in terms of overshadowing into neighbours. And then again, existing 9 a.m. and proposed 9 a.m. at the bottom of the screen, showing a marginal increase at 9 a.m. in the proposed on the property to the left-hand side as fronting the scheme. And then we have the 11 and 1 o'clock in the afternoon showing little impact on neighbouring properties. And then again at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and 5 in the evening. There is an additional condition proposed as late material, and that is prior to the beneficial occupation of the development, the glazing relating to the stairwells on the eastern elevation and in close proximity to number 21 shall be fitted with and retained in obscure glazing. Taking all those into account, Mr. Chairman, the recommendation is that planning permission should be granted subject to the applicant entering into a legal agreement, conditions as set out in the officer's report, and also within the agenda papers and update material. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Barry. Thank you. And we've had, as I said earlier, we've Councillor Ian George has requested to speak as a ward councillor for this site, and we've the committee's in accordance has voted in accordance with, said that we're happy with that. So over to you, Ian. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
There's no time limit.
This,
you don't have a time limit, but I'd ask you to try and keep to the same sort of time limit as objectors get, i.e. about 5 minutes. Yeah.
Much of what I'm going to say is included in my letter of objection, so I'm not going too long. These plans are an overdevelopment of the site and completely out of keeping with a suburban residential area. The plans are for the demolition of 2 quality houses, totally in keeping with the area and the road, to be replaced with 67. That's 67 bed nursing home, plus all the additional servicing that comes along with that, building way into the rear garden. And this is a Kingston Hill, Coombe Hill strategic area of special character. The resulting building and business will introduce an intensive use to the site, which will have a detrimental effect on neighbouring residents. The completed nursing home will generate a large number of vehicle movements from those who live on the site, visitors, employees, and those who service the properties and the residents. Unlike a normal residential building, it can be expected that the site will generate lots of noise and movements throughout the whole day and night. Now, although large houses are often used for nursing homes, they should have plenty of space around them, so as not to cause disturbance to neighbours. They should ideally be situated on a corner of a street or set slightly away from rows of standard family-type houses, or perhaps a smaller development than the one that's proposed tonight. That's what usually happens. These houses are simply an unsuitable site for such a large building, such a large number of people, and such a large business operation. Although the proposed nursing home will be a residential building, it will in effect have all the characteristics, traffic, noise, light, servicing, of being a busy 24-hour business in amongst a row of houses. Building into the rear garden to such an extent as a complete overdevelopment and also get out of keeping with the area. Traffic generation is going to cause a problem as well, and parking problems around the area are bad already. You know, by the junction of Coombe West, Coombe Road and Galsworthy Road, Gloucester Road, especially with a hospital nearby. Now, notice that there are some letters of support on the file. The reasons given are, of course, all very positive, but they're all general points in favour of care housing for the elderly. Nobody will have any other view. But none of these positive comments deal with this particular site and all the problems that will come from building on a plot of 2 houses and gardens in a residential street setting. The objections, however, are quite precise and specific to this site. To summarise, it's an overdevelopment of the site, bulk and mass. It's out of keeping in an area of special character. It's an unacceptable, incompatible use. It's not independent living, the preferred housing for older people, which people like to see these days. It's an intensive use, almost industrial usage of these two houses, certainly as far as neighbours are concerned. The design layout, and considering what they're shoehorning onto the site, it's quite good. But good only that they can get that amount of beds into such a small site. It's totally inappropriate for this site. And I think the noise and disturbance is going to be a concern. Think of the numbers of people, number of vehicles coming and going, minibuses, ambulances, various delivery vans, cars, visitors and staff. So it doesn't meet the demands of policy 7.4 and 7.6 of the London Plan. It would cause an unacceptable harm to the amenity of surrounding land and buildings. It doesn't have regard to the scale, mass and orientation of surrounding buildings. And it doesn't meet policy CS8 of the core strategy due to intensification, lack of independent living, the amount of servicing and times that will be used, all have to keep them with normal houses. This is a business. They have bulk contracts lined up. This application clearly doesn't protect the suburban character as it is required to do. So there are plenty of reasons to turn this down should you wish to do so. Lastly, and I'm just about to finish, if you are lucky enough to live in a house with a garden, I'd like to ask you just take a few minutes to think about this next door to your house. All along the other side of your garden fence, the numbers, the vehicles, the noise, the comings and goings, the hours, you'll no longer be living in a normal suburban residential street setting. Please give that some thought, as that's what we're potentially forcing onto these neighbouring residents tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you very much. And then we've got 3 registered speakers this evening. We've got Steve Elliott, who is speaking as an objector, and then Chris Howell and Gaj Reganathan will be speaking in support of the application. So I turn first to Steve Elliott, and I'll remind you that you have 5 minutes to speak, and we'll let you know when you've got 1 minute left. So over to you, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I hope you can all hear me. Good evening, members, and thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. And on behalf of residents, they would all concur with what Councillor George has just said. I speak on behalf of a group of residents who all live within close proximity to the application site. The proposal before you tonight has raised significant concern by local residents in relation to its design, its scale and its depth, and the impact that it will have upon the existing character and appearance of the area. The NPPF at paragraph 127 states that planning decisions should aim to ensure that developments function well and add to the overall quality of the area, and that developments are visually attractive as a result of good architecture, layout and appropriate and effective landscaping. In addition to the national policy, the core strategy states that the Council's intention is to protect the primarily suburban character of the borough. The assessment of the development proposals will be guided by the borough character study and the residential design SPD. This ensures that any new development takes into account distinctive local features and character, as well as having it to relate well and to connect with surroundings. It is clear that the design, scale and depth of this proposal achieves neither. Whilst a 5-year housing land supply cannot be met, where significant harm is created, this should not sway the decision-making process. The scale of any proposal plays a large part in the determining of the character of a building and its appropriateness. The proposed design, when viewed from Coombe Lane West, creates the impression of 2 separate dwellings and therefore would accord with the street scene. However, the proposed building located on the right-hand half of the site would benefit from a rear projection which extends the entire length of the garden. This projection creates a vast area of flat roof, which is completely at odds with the requirements of the design guide. In this regard, the design guidance indicates that flat roofs should generally be avoided. I think members may wish to consider assessing the bulk and scale of the rear projection in a similar way to if they were assessing an extension to a 2-storey house. The proposed site plan clearly shows the extent of the rear projection. It is also clear that there are no other buildings within direct comparison to the size of this proposal within this section of Coombe Lane West or any surrounding roads. The proposal in effect will create a built form on what is currently the rear garden of number 19 Coombe Lane West. In this regard, the proposed development, by virtue of the loss of the existing garden area, would fail to preserve or enhance the character and appearance of the area and would create a stark contrast with the established pattern of development around it. Furthermore, despite the planning officer indicating within the report that separation distances between the proposed development and the neighbouring residential properties is sufficient to not result in any adverse loss of sunlight or daylight, this does not address, however, the physicality of this proposed development and the harm that it would create. The sheer scale in conjunction with the proposed depth of the rear projection, which in effect would project along the entire rear boundary of the adjoining residential properties located in Brook Gardens and be highly visible from the rear garden of number 21 Coombe Lane West. On the other side of the proposal, it is noted that the 45-degree angle from number 15 Coombe Lane West is maintained. However, the two-storey rear projection extends a considerable distance beyond the rear elevation, therefore resulting in an overbearing structure that will be located only 3.6 metres from their shared boundary. In summary, it is considered that the overdevelopment of this site will appear as an overtly prominent building that will appear incongruous in its context with the general character and appearance of the area, as well as an adversely impacting on the living conditions of the occupiers of the neighbouring residential properties. Therefore, based on these concerns I have, we request that the committee refuse its application tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. I now turn to the applicants, Chris and Gaj. You've similarly between you, as you know, you've got 5 minutes as well. So over to you. I'm gonna let you know when you get to 4 minutes, when you've got 1 minute left. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, Chairman, members and officers. I'm Chris Howell, the Managing Director of Brooks Architects, and was the architect and designer for the scheme and the project architect for the whole proposal. Obviously, I won't reiterate sort of the approach to the design itself. You're familiar with the proposal being considered before you in terms of both its use as well as the proposed design. We've heard about the summary from Mr. Lomax of the size and the arrangement, the height and the layout. Obviously, you can see from the application drawings, the arrangements and the separations that have been provided to the adjoining properties. Clearly, there is a general consensus for the great and growing need for such specialist nursing care homes accommodation. Obviously, we've heard from the previous speakers again that sort of the provision of such accommodation is generally welcomed, and clearly no one is going to object and stand up and complain about the provision of that type of accommodation. This is a very specific type of accommodation. Obviously, it is specialist nursing and dementia care home facility. So it's obviously crosses from, although it being a residential accommodation, as has been said, it does sort of have a tendency to cross over and have a sense of or an element of being sort of a medical facility. The care that we've taken in the design, though, is to ensure that it is a very contextual and a very residential and domestic looking building, both from its approach to the frontage. I think again, everyone's sort of commenting and acknowledging that the Coombe Lane West frontage has been designed, is in a commensurate scale and does have the look and appearance of the two stories. Obviously, most of the comments that have been made are in relation to the rear of the building and how it sits within the building. The approach that we've made, obviously, is to ensure that although as a C2 use, which is obviously classified as a residential institution, for the particular use that we are proposing here, that it obviously has the characteristics more residential and less institutional. It's fundamental to the nature of the dementia type nursing care homes, where obviously we are dealing with very elderly residents who are, to be blunt, unglamorously coming towards the very later stages of their lives, and so have very sort of specific needs. But I would argue that contrary to sort of suggesting that they should be sort of removed from normal residential areas and sort of tucked into corners or tucked away quietly somewhere. I think sort of the residents that we're talking about here have every right to the same dignity and the benefits of the same environment that others do. We are dealing with talking about residents of an average age of about 90 years old. Again, not wishing to be facetious, but they're not going to be running around the garden having all-night parties. It is a 24-hour nursing care home provision. It's the nursing and care home that are there for the 24 hours. The home is maintained 24 hours a day, and clearly the residents need that level of care. So there will be carers and nurses through the night shift. Yes, the home is open 24 hours a day. There may be rare occasions when certain residents do need to be taken perhaps to hospitals, and there may be occasions when actually there may be admissions later in the evenings. But the suggestion that this is sort of a fully functioning operational commercial business running 24 hours a day with all of the noise and the deliveries.
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. Is not the reality. As I say, the application has been carefully designed. The siting's been carefully designed. It's come under scrutiny since it was submitted in December. Over the course of this year, the officers have properly interrogated, both the proposal and the applicant's operations, and as well as the physical arrangements on the site. I have to refer you to the officer's recommendation and the report that's been presented to you, concluding obviously with the recommendation. As such, most of the specific items that have been raised have been addressed. The officers obviously have concluded that it is a contextual design of high quality. I'll obviously just back out now and allow the applicant to just sort of say a few words in conclusion. Obviously, I can answer any comments you've got, any queries you've got in a short while.
Good evening. I'm Gad Dragon.
Time's up, Chair.
Right. Thank you very much. I'm afraid Chris took all your 5 minutes up. So I'm afraid, Gareth, you can't now continue. But thank you very much, Chris and Gareth. If councillors could indicate in the chat function if you've got questions just for the objector at this stage, please. If you've got a question for the objector, could you just type your name in the chat function, please? It looks like we don't have any questions. Oh, I've got Mark, and Mark's come up. Sorry.
It's me, Jeff.
Over to you, Mark. We'll start we've got 5 minutes for questions. We'll start the 5 minutes as soon as you start speaking. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Hi, Stephen. Just a quick question. You mentioned the extension at the rear being a particular concern, I think. But I'm just thinking from the front, looking at the property from the front, I mean, do you think it will be particularly out of keeping to the rest of the properties along the along that side of the road? Okay,
thank you, Mark. Would you like to make a comment or answer to that, Steve?
In terms of the Coombe Lane West Street scene, no, I think everyone has acknowledged that the design is of appears like two detached two-storey houses. But that's not the concern that's been raised. The concern is the pattern of development and the built form at the rear, and just the sheer scale, height, bulk, mass, just not being a characteristic of this area of the borough.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Any
other? If there's other questions, then I can follow up. Yeah. So in terms of
the question, Mark.
Yeah. So in terms of the impacts, obviously, I guess you're concerned about the precedent that sets partly the overdevelopment and the kind of the extra people that be density and noise, etc. But in terms of what other impact would it have? Do you think on the kind of residents in the local area, the design, the bulk at the back of the property? Is it something about the visual aspect of it would be affecting kind of residents?
Well, I'm going to answer the question with a question, if I may. If you were assessing this as a standalone application for a two-storey, single-storey extension on the back of that as a detached house, how would you be viewing the impact on the neighbouring properties? I'm not aware in any experience that I've had of ever granting a two-storey, single-storey extension on a building of that size ever before in my tenure in planning. And that's how I think you need to be making your assessment. It's not necessarily what you see from a street scene, which is an impact. It is the development as a whole and the harm that it creates, not only on the visual aspect from the street scene, but the character of the area and the impact that it has on the neighbouring properties as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think we get your point, Steve, and I'm taking that as a rhetorical question, but thank you, Steve. Any other questions? No, in which case, thank you very much, Steve. We now turn to questions for the applicant and their agent. Could you indicate in the chat function if you've got questions for the applicants, please? And we've got Steph. I'll start off with Steph. If anybody else has got a question, add your name to the chat function, and we'll start the 5 minutes questioning from when you start to ask your question. I've got Leslie following on. Over to you, Steph.
Thank you very much. So just in terms of the concern about the kind of traffic coming in and out, have you got any idea about deliveries and getting rid of waste and that, the frequency of that for this development?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the final delivery plans and servicing strategy method statements will be developed, but obviously, we're not filling the front of this site with, large bin stores. Again, we're trying to keep it within the, the residential appearance and the attractive appearance of the frontage. So there will be multiple refuse collections, for example. They will be collected from standard wheelie bins from the frontage of the site. We've got the in and out driveway, so all of the food delivery vehicles which will come to the site, which, there will be daily deliveries to the site for laundry and food. Clearly, it is a building that needs a sort of a fair degree of servicing, but all of those servicing will be phased and staged and undertaken during the normal working hours. There's no need to have food deliveries and laundry, etc., coming in, as has been suggested in some of the comments, sort of HGVs and articulators coming sort of 24 hours a day. So it will be serviced during the day. Numbers wise, it's going to vary on certain days, but there's going to be, potentially 3 or 4 deliveries to the site, anticipated that there is going to be through a day. There's going to be 3 or 4 probably every day. Different size vehicles and different things.
I think we've got the answer. Thank you very much, Chris. We've only got 5 minutes for questions, so I'm going to go straight to Leslie. Over to you, Leslie.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. Councillor George made reference to the busyness and the 24-hour nature of this nursing home. My question is about the mitigation of light pollution. I live near, or I have backing onto my garden at the rear, a nursing home, and at times the lights are quite bright because obviously the nature of it, residents need attention 24/7 in the night and everything. How would you mitigate that to avoid any light pollution from the houses, say, facing front or back of the nursing home? Thank you.
Okay,
Leslie.
Just if I can just answer quickly, obviously the immediate adjoining properties are obviously sort of next to the building. So obviously the rear wing does extend, project backwards, and the dimensions that we're talking about are always in excess of sort of 20 metres, 50 metres from the back of the garden properties. So, I mean, a substantial separation, 40 metres from the properties on the opposite side of the street. So, we're not close to the boundaries, and we're certainly not in a position where sort of light spill is going to affect any of the windows or the adjoining properties. Obviously, all the properties around do have substantial large gardens. So, obviously, where the building will be visible from is from the very bottom of the gardens to the east side. But those gardens are sort of 35-metre long gardens, and we are about 20 metres from those. All the bedrooms have blinds and curtains. It is a residential building. So, sort of during the night, the residents are asleep. The blinds will be.
Because we've only got 5 minutes. On the question of light, what you haven't mentioned, for example, external lighting, because they can. I've got a neighbour of mine lives. It's probably 300 metres from me, and it's still very bright because we've got, if you like, lights that try and light up the whole garden. Could you expand on your external lighting as well as your internal?
Yes, I mean, obviously the landscape is an important feature as the outlook from the garden, so there will be some sort of feature lighting. There will be some residents that obviously want to use the garden in the evening time. Certainly this time of year, sort of from 5 o'clock it's dark.
1 minute remaining.
Most times there will be light, but again, not sort of through the 24-hour period late at night. In those periods, for ecology reasons as well, obviously the actual sort of flood, it's not floodlighting lighting the garden. It will be closed down as you would expect in a sort of a normal residential garden scenario.
I just want to interject. Our average age is 95. So 95-year-old elderly residents with nursing care are hardly likely to go into the garden, certainly by 8 p.m. So I don't think too many people will be going in the garden after 8 or 9. So I really don't see the light in the garden anyway.
Thank you. We weren't asking whether we weren't expressing an opinion we thought was an issue. We were just asking a question. You've partly answered the question. I don't think you fully answered the question, because you've just said that you probably won't have lights on at night. But well, I guess we'll have to leave it at that. If there's no other questions, we can move on. And that concludes our public participation. So thank you very much, Steve, Chris and Gaj. You can now leave the meeting, and you can follow the rest of the proceedings on the council's YouTube stream. But thank you very much for coming, all of you. Thank you. I'm now going to turn to Barry Lomax to come back and do, if you like, a sweep up. Listening to all the comments made, they were quite wide ranging. The objector made a reference to tilted balance, which we know about only too well. But I'd be grateful in your summing up, Barry, if you could, in particular, I'd like to hear your comments on the tilted balance aspect and how that affects this application. Over to you, Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I should leave the tilted balance to my final part, but a few points. The objector suggested that it would be appropriate to assess this as if it was a two-storey extension to a dwelling house. Now, that, in my opinion, would be the incorrect way to assess it, because it is not an extension to the existing house. It is a new build property, and therefore would not have the same type of assessment as one would undertake on a dwelling house. So that's first and foremost, I thought, rather important. Secondly, Councillor Heap spoke about lighting. Condition 11 requires a lighting plan to be submitted and approved in writing by the local planning authority. So we would have control over lighting if members were minded to I've been told it's number 11, but on my screen that's telling me it's Arbor Cultural. I'll find the exact number. There is a condition about lighting which I should come to. On the tilted balance question, the proposal is for a form of housing delivery, and therefore the tilted balance is brought into play because the local planning authority is unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply like many other authorities. Condition 30 is the lighting condition, sorry. So the tilted balance is brought into play in the full knowledge that we ratioed down the 67 down to whatever I said it was, 30 odd. So it's 30 homes that we're giving the extra weight to, not the 67. And then we are left with having to assess whether the adverse impacts of allowing this development would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. Now, in terms of benefits, the strategic housing market assessment, which the council, in conjunction with its partner authorities, undertook in 2017, highlights an overriding need for elderly persons accommodation, and that elderly persons accommodation with care needs, which this would provide. So that is something which also would carry weight in the proposal. And just finally, I'm just looking at the agenda. There appears on my report to be a missing condition, which is on the report I have, and that's a servicing plan. So that condition should be included for a servicing plan. It's on the IDOC system. It doesn't seem to be pulled through to the report. So in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I think that's everything that was raised. And of course, as usual, happy to take any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Barry. So that does take us to questions. If you can put your name in the, I think Simon already, that was the 30 answering the condition question. So for questions at the moment, I've got Steph and then Rebecca. You can keep, and then Roy. You can add your name as we go along. So Steph, this is.
Yes. So I think going back to the lighting issue that they didn't really answer very well, because I think the issue would be security lights that can really blaze very brightly and be very annoying. Could we do something, Barry, to make sure that the security lights are kind of very, very limited or something like that? What would your suggestion be?
I mean, we've got condition 30, which is it's full details of the lighting across the site shall be submitted to and approved in writing to the local planning authority prior to the occupation of the development hereby approved. It then goes on with a little bit more detail, and it says they must be carried out in accordance with the approved plan, etc. I would have thought that was sufficient, but I would have thought Barry, as head of planning, who will be overseeing the discharge of these conditions, could take our comments now on board. That I would agree with, if you like, I think probably the thinking of both Leslie and Steph, that it is reasonable to me that they have some outside lighting, but that should be very low. To me, it should be low level for safety purposes of at night, for staff to be outside, getting in it as necessary. And it absolutely should not be. We do not want the garden floodlit at night. I mean, I'm not suggesting that the applicants would either, but so I think in discharging that condition, I think the condition is strong enough. And Barry can listen now and agree with me, I hope, that when they discharge those conditions, they make sure that the lighting is not a nuisance to neighbours. I'll pass over to Barry.
Yeah, agreed, Mr. Chairman. That condition is I didn't write it. It's far more detailed than ordinarily I would write. So that condition does cover everything bar the batteries that go in the light. So hours of operation, light spillage, hours of use. So certainly in the full knowledge of the concerns of the committee, the reason we can certainly take them into account in discharging the condition. The reason for the condition is to ensure that lighting is appropriately located, designed not to adversely impact neighbouring residential amenity, and also to protect the biodiversity value of the site, in particular bats. So I think we're covered on all bases, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Barry. And I hope if you can come back when we get to comments, people, you can come back, Steph, but I think that covers it. Rebecca.
Thank you, Chair. So you answered the question about, well, maybe not satisfactorily to some, but about the extension and how that's dealt with differently if it's a house. Could you explain more about the objector talked about the concerns about protecting the suburban nature of the area, and obviously this has been recommended to be approved. Could you explain about how the policy allows that when residents obviously very strongly feel that it doesn't? Thank you.
Thanks, Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Kingston Hill, Coombe Hill strategic area of special character is designated as such because of large dwellings in large plots. That is what is characteristic of this part of the Royal Borough. And the proposal has been designed so as from public vantage points, what you see is two large dwellings in large plots. Now, there is a large extension to the rear, and that certainly hasn't tried to be hidden by the developer, and certainly not hidden by officers in assessing it. But we consider, when looking at whom this would impact upon, it's very limited. Where it can be seen from is very limited, and therefore in assessing who might be harmed in noticing this very large extension and would be in some way disadvantaged by it is very limited. So we don't shy away from the fact that it is a large extension, but in terms of assessing what are the adverse impacts of the extension and would they significantly, demonstrably outweigh any benefits, I think we are then left with a decision from officers that say they wouldn't. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Barry. Roy has got a question. Over to you, Roy.
Thank you, Chair. My question is actually exactly the same as one of my questions is exactly the same as Councillor Mole. I too was actually concerned about the impact of the Part 2 story and very large single-story rear extension. And as the objector did point out, that, or actually asked us to look into this, as how would we feel if this was a application which asked for a rear extension of this type to a attached building? And the answer which Barry Lomax actually provided was that this isn't an existing building and the application for a new build. I think the point here is that whether it's a new build or an existing building that's got an extension, the building is going to be there and the impact of that building will be the same regardless of whether it's a new build or not. Having said that, you have to some extent answered that question actually, and that the consideration here is to do with harm and what is the harm. So I know, Chair, I apologise, this is question time and not comments, and perhaps I'm going on to comments now. So that was my question that has been answered, and I suppose I'm saying I thank you for that answer. But my other question is actually, if I may, Chair, ask that straight away, is to do with the area of special character which you also alluded to. And it's to do with heritage assets. As you well know, there's Coombe Conduit down the road, and the pipes that feed, or used to feed, Hampton Court for fresh water, run diagonally across this site. My question is, a statement is made in the report that there will be no harm to these pipes. Kingston Heritage is, as you very well know, very dear to my heart. I want to know, how did you assess that those pipes are not going to be affected, given that the applicant is proposing to put a rather large basement in there as well? Sorry, it's long-winded.
I'll turn to Barry, obviously, to answer that. If I've heard, I had a job hearing the question very clearly, but if I've understood it right, Roy, you're referring to the Hampton Court conduit, or the, I think it's called, that goes across the site, but it goes across the site quite in a different place from where the basement is. So I would have thought that answers the question, but I'll let Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just 2 points very quickly. I know your first question sort of / comment was about the extension. Just to clarify, of course, we shouldn't be treating this in any way as if it's an extension, because it's not an extension. It's not extending anything. It's part of a new build. So to treat it as if it were extension would be incorrect, because it is a new build. Now, turning to the archaeological question and heritage assets. Now, you're correct. We need to take into account heritage assets and how they impact on the operation of the tilted balance. The strategic area of special character is a non-designated heritage asset, so that wouldn't disengage the tilted balance, but in any event, officers think that the strategic special character isn't harmed. Turning to the Coombe culvert, or conduit rather, the applicants have submitted a basement construction and methodology statement. That basement and methodology statement has been sent to our friends and colleagues in the Greater London Archaeological Services, GLAS, who work on behalf of Historic England, and they have come back saying that subject to a condition number 9, which requires a written scheme of investigation. So no demolition or development should take place until a written scheme of investigation has been submitted to and approved by the local planning authority. And so the whole of that condition, there's 2 parts to it, would be sufficient to demonstrate that no harm would be caused to that heritage asset, being the archaeological interest found in the Coombe conduit. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Barry. I'm going to turn to Simon. Thank you, Simon. Your question.
Thank you, Chair. In fact, Barry has almost completely already answered my question, but I have one little thing to ask. It's this: can you, Barry, remind us in relation to non-designated heritage assets, leaving aside tilted balance, what the statutory requirements are in relation to our consideration of harm to non-statutory designated heritage assets, namely in this case the area of special count?
Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the test one would apply for a heritage asset is the preservation or conservation of a heritage asset is given significant weight, and the test there is if one causes any degree of harm, that has to be assessed. Lesser substantial harm has to be outweighed by significant public benefits. Now, when we come to non-designated heritage assets, whilst still very important, the test associated with that is not as strict, and it is found in paragraph 197 of the framework, where it says that we are to take the impact on the significance of a non-designated asset, and it should be taken into account in the determination of the application. And it is really a situation where you would arrive at a balanced judgment having regard to scale of harm or loss. So it is a much lighter test, not making light of the importance of non-designated heritage assets, but by very fact they're non-designated, they don't carry the same force or weight as a heritage asset would. I hope that answers the question, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I think so. Thank you, Barry. Final question is from Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Just thinking about the effect on the kind of local amenities and the neighbours. I was just one thing that potentially concerned me was the effect on number 21. So if you're looking at the front from the front to the right, you've got a fairly small garden, and the new developments proposed is going to set back the property is going to be a bit deeper, if that's the right word, and so potentially having more of an impact on that particularly fairly small garden, and especially I think looking at the shadow kind of forecast, if that's the right term, that you provided kind of in the evenings, potentially obscuring the light in their garden. I know the other gardens, I think they're particularly a lot larger and much going to set further back, so I don't think there's a particular impact there. It's just particularly about that particular garden, number 21. I don't know if that was of any particular concern to you, if you considered it, and if that is potentially a significant impact on the garden, how should we weigh it up in our decision-making process?
Thanks, Mark. I'm not sure if that was a question or a comment. I don't know if you've got.
Well, I considered it really, what their assessment was. So there you go.
We've got what the assessment is, but I'll let Barry come back if he wishes. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the greatest impact is found at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the 21st of March, and the impact the garden of the property is of neighbouring property number 21 is 3/4 in shadow, and as a result of the development at 5 o'clock, the whole of the garden would be in shadow. However, the element of the garden that is not in shadow currently is the rear right-hand side of the garden. So it's not taking light away from inside of the property and not taking much light away from the rear garden, given that 3/4 visual assessment, probably slightly more than 3/4, is already in shadow. So officers, taking into account the daylight and sunlight report, the orientation of the building, consider that any impact would be minimal in terms of overshadowing, and would not justify, in officers' opinion, a reason to refuse the development. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Barrett. I think we have to take that on board and form our own judgment on that. Yeah. Very last, this is going to be the last question before we go on to the debate and the decision is Roy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This question is to do with the letters of objection and letters of support. Now, I note that there's 36 letters of objections, and I think, if I remember from memory, 56 letters of support. which in both instances are a large number of letters. Now, my understanding is that 36 letters of objection are obviously from the surrounding neighbouring properties. My question to the officer is, does he have to know the 56 letters of support that we received, where they actually came from predominantly?
I blame Barry for that. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm afraid I don't know where those letters have come from individually, but you're right. Both sides of the equation, 36 in objection and 56 in support, is a clear indication that it is of significant local interest. And how that interest is split in terms of support and objection, unfortunately, I don't have the details of the individual addresses. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Barry. Before we go on to the debate, I'm now formally recommending, or formally moving the recommendations on pages 103, A103 to 120, which is to approve the application, etc. In doing that, I'm not suggesting that that's how I'm going to vote. Just moving it as a matter of procedure. Do we have a seconder for that, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to second that.
Thank you, Kim, and I'm sure that's on the same basis. You're not, you haven't decided.
Subject to the same provisos. That's right.
Yeah, thank you very much. We now go to the debate. So there's no names there, but I'm sure there will be names coming up in the chat function now. We will go to a debate and then on to the vote. If there's anybody wants to go first, if not, I'll just say something. But I don't like going. I think as chair I should hold back. Does anybody want to say anything? Apparently not.
Okay, I'll say something.
Okay, thank you, Steph. Over to you.
So the number of car parking spaces, just out of interest, are we confident that this is enough and that there won't be lots of kind of on-street parking with visitors and staff, and that kind of thing? Is that something we should be concerned about?
I don't know whether that's a question that the officers can answer. I mean, we know in the report, I've got the report here, but I'm not sure I'm going to get to the page where it's got there's 36 staff, is it overall? Have I got that wrong? Somewhere it's got the number of staff. Obviously it's a 24-hour operation, so there will be, I'm guessing, more staff on during the day than in the night time, for example, but those staff will be coming and going at different times. We've got, in my ward in Surbiton Hill, we've got Southborough, and we've got a number of large residential care and nursing homes, and they have car parks which mostly seem to be empty with lots of spare spaces. And we do see, I've been in my own ward seeing care staff walking to and from at sort of staff changeover times. You see the care staff walking in and out. So I'm giving you my thought on it.
Yeah, are they as large as this though, those ones?
Some are probably the same sort of size, yeah. That sort of, I don't want to mislead you. There's certainly 50 bed. We certainly got some with sort of 50 bed pluses. I don't know whether they're 67 beds or not. I don't know, but they're certainly of the same sort of size. But I'm going to leave it there. Did you want to say anything on that, Barry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I can, just very briefly, the application is supported by a transport assessment, which estimates trips and parking requirements. And the study they've provided suggests that the 14 spaces, 2 of which are accessible, would meet the needs. There's also a minibus space and a minivan space. And that has gone to our colleagues in the highways team, and they are content that the proposed number of car parking spaces would meet the needs of the development. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you very much, Barry. You've answered it more technically than I did. Mine was more subjective, I suppose, on what I've noticed in nursing and care homes in my area. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Just to mention parking, we must bear in mind that This is on the 57 bus route. It's very near the 213 and all the small buses that go to Kingston Hospital, and not far from Norbiton Station. And I too live in an area where there are a good number of nursing homes nearby. One of which is at the back of my garden, and an awful lot of the staff get there by public transport. And we can't anyway refuse an application unless the impact on highways is cumulatively severe. My concern really is on heritage. It's a tricky one in a sense. This is a non-designated asset, and Barry has very carefully explained how that is just something we put into the balance, and any harm that might be caused is not treated in the same way as it is if this were a designated asset. And we don't have, as a borough, a specific policy about backland development, which is what this is. And this featured in the development proposal down in Chessington the other day, where a whole line of houses was built in the back garden of two semi-detached, was it 4 semi-detached houses? So we don't have that policy. There is the added point here about that, but my feeling is that the benefit to the community of this provision of a large number of very sorely needed dementia care beds in this area will outweigh what I think there is some element of harm to the character of the area here, but it is only an element of harm. And I think in the end, I'm going to support this.
Thank you very much, Simon. And I'm going to come. I don't always come in. Rebecca's waiting to come in as well. I haven't forgotten you, Rebecca. I sort of tend to agree with your analysis, Simon. My view is that the applicant, when he spoke, said that the design of the building was of a residential-looking building. Well, I'd say I half agree with him and half disagree with him in as far as the 2 front blocks that front Combe Lane West are residential looking. I think the block to the back, I better not call it an extension because Barry will tell me off for calling it an extension, but the rear garden element, we'll call it, is of a very, to be kind to it, I would say it's a very bland design, which is at best okay. I think it would be difficult. I can't say that it's so awful that I think there's a reason to refuse it on design grounds. Nevertheless, I don't think much of the rear element of it. I don't think it'll have an enormous impact on neighbours actually, either. So do I like it? Not particularly. Do I think it'll have a big impact on neighbours? No, I don't. I'm going to turn to Rebecca because she's been patiently waiting. Rebecca.
Yeah, I agree with you, Chair and Councillor Edwards. I think we all have, or it feels, the comments I've heard so far, that we all have some hesitancy with whether it's suburban in nature as per what we would interpret as individuals. However, when you look at the technicality of planning law, and we may see where it can be frustrating in applications like this, where we can understand why especially the rear elevation is particularly dominant. But I haven't been persuaded persuaded that there is any planning policy reason for why we could refuse this, despite the fact that I can understand some of the concerns. On the scales, it doesn't feel that outweighs the benefits and also what planning policy allows. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And with that, I'm not going to say anything else. We've all got the plans. The plans were perfectly adequate for us to see the site. A number of us have been on a site visit, an organised site visit. I'm sure everybody else has been along to have a look or knows the site well. So we're going to go to the vote, and I'll pass over to Sam to do the roll call. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Chair. I will now call upon each councillor in turn. Please can you indicate how you wish to vote by saying for, against or abstain. Please can you also confirm that you've been present for the duration of the meeting. Councillor Archer.
For, and I've been present for the duration of the meeting.
Councillor Aurora.
Abstain, and I have been here throughout the entire meeting.
Councillor Bailey.
For, and I confirm I've been present throughout the meeting.
Councillor Bainan.
I have been present throughout the meeting, and I vote for.
Councillor Cunningham.
For, and I've been here for the whole of the meeting.
Councillor Dunstone.
For, and I've been present for the whole of the meeting.
Councillor Edwards.
I've been present throughout the meeting, and I vote for.
Councillor Heap.
I vote for, and I've been here throughout the meeting.
Councillor Mole.
I've been present throughout, and I vote for.
And Councillor Self. Councillor Self.
I do apologise. I was speaking, and I thought I'd turn my microphone on. Sorry. I vote for, and I've been here throughout, of course. So thank you.
To confirm, that's 9 in favour and 1 abstention, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. So that is passed. Could councillors indicate whether you need a short 5-minute? It will be maximum 5-minute break, or I'd like just to carry straight on. Is that okay? Everybody all right carrying straight on? That's a yes, in which case, that's good. We go to the next application, which was the other one on the agenda, the first one on the agenda, because we've changed the order. It's for application number 20, I believe, is 00945, 15 to 23 Fife Road, Kingston, which is the site where PC World and Sports Direct are at the moment. And it's for the demolition of the existing buildings on the site and the erection of a Part 7, Part 9-storey building, plus basement to provide co-living accommodation and a restaurant, together with associated and ancillary facilities, accessing and servicing, parking and landscaping arrangements. So I'm going to turn to Barry to present this, and it's already come up on our screens, Barry, so we can see your presentation slides. Thank you very much. Over to you, Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this application is in Kingston Town at number 15 to 23 Fife Road. It's for the demolition of the existing buildings on the site and for the erection of a Part 7, Part 9-storey building for a co-living accommodation, use class sui generis, and the restaurant, use class A3, together with associated and ancillary facilities, access, servicing, parking and landscape arrangements. On screen now you see the application site. It corners on the corner of Dolphin Street and Fife Road. And then we see an aerial photograph, a bird's eye photograph showing the application site with the office accommodation behind and the mental centre to the side. And then on screen now we see a setting out of the development plan designations, showing the site in an area of archaeological interest, an area of special character on Castle Street, the listed building is the Benthall Centre, and a number of locally listed buildings. On screen you see some photographs of the site. Members will be familiar, I suspect, with this part of Kingston Town. And this shows the site, the Sports Direct. And then this is to the rear of the application site, the rearmost part being this grey building. You see on the left of photographs number 1, 3 and 4, a grey, a brick structure. They are residential units. So looking at the existing elevations around the site, all 4 sides, and then the existing floor plans. with retail being split across most floors of the Sports Direct facility, and then the ground floor of PC World. So in detail, the proposal is to demolish the existing buildings, the erection of a Part 7 9-storey and 9-storey building plus basement, the provision of 200 large-scale purpose-built shared living accommodation, as they're known in the intent to publish London Plan, also known more colloquially as co-living units, comprising room sizes of between 16.6 square metres and 26 square metres. 1,205 square metres of internal amenity space, including a residence gym, flexible work event space, a communal kitchen, dining areas, cinema and a lounge. There would be 336 square metres of external landscaped amenity space, 210 cycle parking spaces, and contribution to provide 1 on-street accessible car parking space. The proposal is proposed to be a car-free development. That is to say that none of the residents would have access to car parking permits. There would be a ground floor cafe restaurant of 424 square metres, and also co-working space at the ground floor, which would be used by residents and also bookable by members of the community. So this is a space that would have a rent-a-desk space if required. The application includes the public realm improvements comprising the formalisation of the motorcycle parking to the rear of the site, which is in somewhat of a poor state of repair, and also the repaving of the area immediately outside of the 2 existing units, the proposed single unit, and the planting of two street trees. The application includes 46% reduction in carbon over the 35% by use of air source heat pumps and by photovoltaic cells. There is a contribution to be paid of £213,000. There would be 350 square metres of blue roofs and water attenuation systems, and the BREEAM Excellent would be targeted. If I now take you through the floor plans, this is the basement plan showing the gym and wellness centre with studio for residents, with changing facilities, a communal laundry drying room, a screening cinema room, and then you have the bike store and the plant area, refuse storage. There are lifts, 4 lifts, a cycle lift, a goods lift, and then 2 resident lifts, one of which, FF, would be a firefighting lift. Coming up to the ground floor, you see the proposed cafe restaurant space, and then on the other side you see the co-working space, which would be, as I said, for residents and members of the public who'd be able to book if they needed just to rent a bookable space. Going up to the first floor, you see the communal dining area with bedrooms laid out as indicated on screen, with a communal terrace at the rear of the property and a communal terrace to the front. Up to the second floor with residential accommodation spread out, and then same on the 3rd and the 4th floor, the 5th and the 6th floor, the 6th floor having a rooftop lounge with, again, bookable private space for residents and the communal terrace. And then we go to the 7th and 8th floor, and then finally onto the roof where you see the photovoltaic array. As I said, the public realm improvements are focused on the provision of those 2 street trees. At the moment, there is no or are no street trees in the immediate area, and also the formalisation of the parking for mopeds, motorcycles to the rear. Here we see the proposed elevations. It is proposed to build the structure out of brick with terracotta tiles. Moving around, you see this corner feature of the proposal with the advertising space of the 9 yards Kingston branding down the corner. This is better shown in this image that shows this corner feature of the development where the Dolphin and Fife Road would terminate. This is a CGI of the proposed development. It has been designed so as to borrow architectural elements of vernacular from the Benthall Centre, but also at the same time being of an architectural language, which would be an innovative statement piece on this part of the Fife Road, Dolphin Street area of the town. Here we see a view from Fife Road. So we are at the end of Castle Street looking towards the Benthall Centre. And then this is a view from the rear. Looking at housing delivery. So as with the previous scheme, we would be looking at the equivalent of 111 dwellings to be delivered by proposal. As per national policy, there is a ratio that would bring the 200 down to 111 dwellings, and this at a time when the council is not able to demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable housing sites would be of substantial weight. Turning now to affordable housing, the application has been accompanied by a viability assessment, which has been independently assessed by independent consultants appointed by the council, and that independent assessment concludes that the proposal is not capable of delivering affordable units. In terms of this type of accommodation, affordable units would never be provided on site. The policy would ask for affordable units to be in the form of a cash sum or an ongoing payment. We have assessed this proposal, and in lieu of a late stage review, officers have negotiated a £450,000 contribution to affordable housing to be paid in 2 instalments, 50% on commencement and 50% at 50% occupation. We have checked this with our independent consultants to see whether we would be likely to achieve such a sum of money if we were to rely on a late stage review. And our advice is, at this point, taking the payment up front in lieu of a late stage review would net a better result and would enable the council to spend the contribution immediately and therefore make contributions towards the affordable housing needs in the borough. Looking at impact on residential amenity, the properties with green circles are properties that contain residential accommodation. The application has been accompanied by daylight and sunlight assessment, and the only property that has some impact on daylight is the property over here. However, that impact in terms of the vertical sky component is still within the acceptable levels as set out by the BRE guidance. Looking at the typical room size, it is important to note that there are no standards in terms of floor area for properties such as what is proposed. The Mayor of London is very clear in the intent to publish London Plan that the normal space standards are not applicable for these type of units. What is important to note is that whilst the bedrooms are, the rooms are undeniably small, 16.6 square metres for the majority of the rooms, increasing to 26 square metres for the accessible, wheelchair accessible rooms, it is important to note what this type of property or proposal is trying to replace. And what it is replacing is living in shared accommodation. That is, its market is instead of houses in multiple occupation. So if we were to compare it to something like a house in multiple occupation, the size of the rooms here and the access to shared facilities would far, in officers' opinion, far outweigh the benefits that you might get in a house in multiple occupation. Here you would have some space for able to be some isolation space for you to be able to work at your desk here, for you to have access to a kitchenette, bedroom, and for ensuite facilities. So there are no space standards. However, we consider that the layout functions well. The accessible units for wheelchairs at 8% is greater than 5% that would be required by the building control standards, and in any event would present better accommodation than a house in multiple occupation. Looking at the late material, there are a couple of typographical errors in the report. The dashboard states that there's 206 cycle spaces are proposed. However, it's 210, and that is how it is set out on paragraph 22.6 of the report. There are a number of other conditions which are being amended in the late material. The recommendation is that planning permission should be granted subject to the legal agreement to the conditions set out in the officer's report, agenda papers and update papers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Barry, for that comprehensive summary of the application. Before we go on to questions, we've got, as was mentioned earlier, under procedural rule 27, Councillor Sharon Felchikoff-Sumner has requested to speak, and we've all agreed to that. So Sharon, the floor is yours. There's no set time limit for this, but you know what I'm going to say. If we haven't got registered speakers for this, but if we did, they would be limited to 5 minutes each. So I'd ask you to try and keep to about that. Thank you very much. Over to you, Sharon. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to keep it as brief as I can. I was originally, when I first heard of this concept, I thought it was quite an exciting one and certainly was very interesting for our city. But then when I looked at it, I must say that I was somewhat disappointed, if you like. It didn't really meet the expectations. Whilst there may be some very good things about the scheme, I think you have to be clear that the majority of residents who are going to live here are going to be living in spaces that are 16 metres wide, in 16 square metres. And if you look at the plans, you're looking at spaces that are 2 metres wide. So that is basically just a little bit wider than a bed is long. And I don't feel, I would not want my grown-up child when he's older living in a space of that size. This is primarily aimed at young professionals, and I feel there is really, I think if you look at the situation at the moment where we have epidemics, would you really want 200 people living in a building with such small spaces? I imagine lockdown in a building like this would be intolerable. It's almost, the spaces here are actually smaller than the halls of residence I lived in. And I only lived there through, for part of the year. And at least with halls of residence, you generally have a kitchen and a living space on each floor. Here we're looking at having one large catering kitchen shared amongst 200 people and a dining room and a lounge. And if you actually look at the proportion of the space, I don't think that's actually adequate for the number of residents. And I would certainly feel that space being shared amongst floors would have been a better design and would have allowed for much better amenity space for the potential residents in here. So I would ask you to ask about that. I know there is some concerns over the height, that is for the committee to decide, but I would just say to look at those spaces size. Even the report says that these spaces are, they're not fit to be, permanent residences, and that's what they're going to be. The other concern I have, and I have raised this with officers this evening, and I'm sorry for the late notice, but it's something that was brought to my attention only this week, was regarding the classification of sui generis. So let's be clear that from what I can understand, all 200 of these residents will not be paying council tax. So they will all have benefits, they'll be able to utilise the benefits of our town, our roads, street lighting, but they won't be paying council tax at all. And so whilst we are getting contributions for social housing, and also I noticed the carbon contribution, that doesn't really outweigh what we're giving up, which is approximately £250,000 in council tax. So there are questions as well about this classification, because it's not classed as residential. The other problem that I have with this is, earlier today I spoke to a senior building control professional about this scheme to get an understanding about how its classification as non-residential would affect on fire safety and the enhanced safety measures in the fire safety bill for buildings which are classed as high risk, which in residential will be anything over 18 metres. But because it's not residential, it won't fall into that. So I do have concerns that because it's not classified technically as residential, it won't benefit from those enhanced measures it would have got otherwise. I do note, obviously, in the report there is a fire safety assessment, but that is that we are not but they're not tied to that because it's not a residential building, if you like. And so I really feel that if you look at the classifications for high-risk buildings for residential buildings in both the fire safety bill and also the building standards bill, which is about to be adopted, this building would not benefit from those enhanced measures that have been put forward by Dame Judith Hackett. And I think that we really should be mindful of that. And so personally, I think it should be deferred until we know exactly what the situation is. But secondly, I would ask, if you are going to pass that, whether some actual conditions be put into place to make sure that they would benefit, the building would benefit from those enhanced measures that they would have benefited from if it was classified as a residential building. But also, is there anything we can do about changing the actual classification from sui generis? But because the building control professional I spoke to, who is in charge of a major authority, was very, very concerned, and will be following this building throughout its construction now, and will be raising this in the parliamentary group he's a member of, because he's that concerned that this is a loophole that that developers can get through. So please do have a look and see if there's any additional conditions that can be put in place to make sure that it is as safe as physically possible for any of the people that live there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. You've raised several points there, and we don't have, as I say, we don't have registered speakers. So I'm going to turn to Barry just to come back on. I'd like Barry to come back particularly on the use class sui, if I could say it, it'd be something, use class sui generis. I don't know. I would have thought that doesn't mean that the building control is going to be any more lax, but we're obviously not looking tonight to pass the building. We're not building control. We are planners, and when it goes, if we approve this tonight, when it eventually starts to be, or when it is before it's built out, it'll have to get building control approval, which is a completely separate process. But Barry, could you come back on that and any other points that you wish? Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a few points, and this committee knows its terms of reference and doesn't need me to tell it what its terms of reference are. But of course, having said that, I'm going to make a small point that this isn't a policy-making committee. This is a committee that applies the policies that happen to be in the development plan at a point in time. And the policies which are relevant for this type of development is set out in the intent to publish London plan. And it is clear space standards are not applicable. So therefore, my advice to this committee is we should not be applying those space standards. The London plan, intent to publish London plan, is clear that these are not dwelling houses, so they are not a C3 classification, and it is not for us locally to describe them as C3 units, because that is not, they are not C3 units. We are told by the mayor and by the inspectors who've gone through the mayor's plan in the examination in public that they are not dwelling houses, which is why we have a different affordable housing offer. So the classification is as set out, and I'm just very quickly looking at my copy of the London plan, where the mayor is clear in his plan at paragraph 4.16.2. This policy applies to large-scale purpose-built shared living developments, which in planning terms are sui generis, not self-contained market housing. So we are not to depart from that, is my advice to this committee. The issue with council tax, again, is not a matter that we should be taking into account. Just by way of aside, I'm not sure whether the residents who will be taking up residence in the care home we've just dealt with would also be paying council tax. I'm not sure how that works in a care home C2 institution, which again isn't a C3 dwelling house. So that's not something that this committee should, in my advice, turn its mind to. And then finally, with regard to the fire safety issues, fire safety is clearly a very important issue. And we've been working with the developer to ensure that they submit a fire safety strategy to include how this building could be designed in a way that addresses fire safety concerns. They have demonstrated that fire safety has been dealt with in the first instance, and they say how it can be dealt with. It is now a matter for the building control regime to deal with the finer details of how fire safety will be met. I don't know how the fire safety bill will come out of Parliament. It might come out in a different shape than what it went in, but none of us here are to second guess what the parliamentarians do with legislation. So, in conclusion, the use class is sui generis as per the intent to publish London Plan. These are not C3 units, and therefore they will have a different affordable housing offer as set out in the report. They would not be caught by the space standards set in the London Plan because they're not C3 units. And with regards to issues like council tax, that is not one that I advise this committee should be dealing with. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Barry. And that takes us on to questions, and we go straight to David and then Rebecca. And if you've got a question, you know the form, put your name in the chat function. So over to you, David.
Thank you, Chair. I'm putting this question to Barry. Had the developer here been here, I would have put it to him, but I think Barry may be able to answer. I'm rather cynical about PRS within Kingston. There have been a number of proposals for PRS in Kingston. We've actually given permissions, but nobody has built PRS in Kingston. And although I have been and I have gone to see several PRS schemes in central London where they obviously work satisfactorily and people are prepared to live in rabbit hutches in the centre of London accordingly, it hasn't materialised in Kingston. And I therefore rather cynical about the reality of getting PRS in Kingston. And my cynicism is based on the fact that if a committee gives permission for a PRS scheme with so many small units and a size that was considered by the committee to be acceptable for a PRS, if the developer then decide they had under their belt a planning permission which would set out a number of the policy issues which they could then put in a different policy, a different application for flats to rent, flats to buy, we would be in a difficult situation. So the question I would have asked the developer, but Barry may not be able to answer this, is what experience they have in building PRS, and have they, I'm sure if I asked them, did they intend to build it out? Of course, I would expect to know the answer, but I think it's a concern of mine, and I think it should be a concern of the council if we give application permission and then set some form of a standard. So that would be my first question. My second question is on the £450,000 for affordable housing contribution. Now, I don't query the financial calculation in order to come by that 450,000. It seems, of course, to me to be a trifling amount. The query that I would make is, it says in the agenda that this is equivalent to 35% of the units. Well, I've got to say that 450,000 is unlikely to buy you even one unit in central Kingston. And therefore, to say this is equivalent to 35, which is something like 70 units, I see is, to say the least, incongruous. So I'm not saying that you haven't got the right figure of 450, although I query it, but I certainly don't think that is equivalent to 35% of the units in order to get affordable housing. So those are my two immediate questions.
Thank you, David. I turn straight to Barry on the affordable. I'm assuming it's saying that it would be that percentage of units would be. It's not buying. That isn't going to buy. It's only moving it from.
No, but it's equivalent on the table to 35% of 35% contribution. In other words, they are equating this to a development whereby we would expect to get, let us say, 35%.
35% affordable, and it doesn't seem enough for that, actually. So, Barry.
But sorry, can I just say, I don't want Barry to say, oh, well, that's down to the financial calculation, because I'm not querying that, because I've been down that and I've got a sore throat on that one already.
Thanks, David. I mean, unless
can I clear up?
I'm not going to find it. I don't think I'm going to find it straight off. I read this pretty carefully. I thought it said the viability assessment said it wasn't viable to produce any affordable, but we would therefore ask for a late stage review, and instead of that, we've gone for the 450,000. So, but I'll let Barry, because I'm sure we'll get it a lot clearer than I.
I'm not sure that will be the case, but I should try, Mr. Chairman. So I think this is maybe a mea culpa that maybe we haven't been as clear in the report. The 35% in the dashboard you see is the relevant standard. That's what they should be providing. That isn't what they are providing.
No, I understand that.
Yeah, so the 450,000 isn't equivalent to 35% of the units. The policy should be 35% of the units at a 50% discount, but they're not meeting that standard. Instead, it's 450,000, which isn't equivalent to anything. In effect, it's a pot of money, and we haven't gone through the exercise to see what that would be equivalent to. But you're right, it certainly is not equivalent to 35% of the units. Councillor Self has just answered the private rented sector question, which is the PRS that Councillor Cunningham was referring to, Councillor Heap was inquiring about. So PRS. One of the issues we faced in this borough and in other boroughs with regards to this type of development, co-living PRS, which is a new type, is the intent to publish London Plan is the first time that there's been a policy that tackles these type of developments head on. So before this London Plan was first published in, I think it was the end of last year, 2019, there was no clear policy guidance about what a co-living type space should be. So we do have some examples around the capital. There's the Collective, I think, over in Ealing. There is a development in Wandsworth. So there are some about. We don't have any built in the Royal Borough, but the developers have spoken to schemes that they're familiar with and shared details of up in Wandsworth. And we, as Councillor Cunningham said, of course, they told us they're going to build it out, and they would, wouldn't they? But we've got no reason to suspect they wouldn't. One thing we have done is suggested by way of a legal agreement, tying them up to ensuring it remains rented, to ensuring they don't become individual dwelling houses, so as to go as far as we can do to address some of the concerns, which are quite right, the concerns of Councillor Cunningham, to make sure they're not trying to sneak this through the back door. If they get permission this evening, it will be tied up legally to being exactly what they're proposing. Co-living space, not C3 units, rented with certain terms in rental agreements, and there's a whole host of things in the legal agreement that they need to comply with, and there'll be ongoing requirements, a management plan of the facility, concierge facilities. There'll be lots of things they have to deliver. So I hope that goes some way to address Councillor Cunningham's concerns. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Barry. I think you've answered it, David's question, as much as you can. Although, did you want to come back, David?
No, I understand exactly what was said.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. I wasn't. No, right. If you can mute, then that would be great. Thank you, David. Rebecca is next, I think. Yeah, Rebecca.
I was going to ask is, you mentioned that the architecture is borrowed from the Benthall Centre, and I was wondering if you could point that out for me, as I don't currently see it. And then, I don't know, and with the small rooms, the design review panel obviously had concerns over quality of internal space. Does that bear any relevance, or because of the London Mayor's policy, it doesn't? And how does the height and mass affect the Grade 2 listed Benthall's Centre in terms of heritage? Thank you.
Thank you. Barry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I take the architecture, so I get my Art Deco and Art Nouveau mistaken. Whichever one happens to be the architecture style for the Benthall Centre, and the modern part of the Benthall Centre, not the historic part of the Benthall Centre, which is over by John Lewis. The modern part, that's where it borrows the modern type of architecture from, which you see in the Benthall Centre. So, as I say, my Art Nouveau or Art Deco, whichever one that happens to be more like the Benthall Centre, is what it borrows its elements from. With regards to national policy, then no, we don't have national policies on space standards with regards to these properties, so we don't have anything we can hang our hat on there. And with regards to the Benthall Centre, the Benthall Centre as a whole is listed because buildings are listed in their entirety. However, the listing description identifies that the significance of the Benthall Centre is found in the frontage on Wood Street and the internals. And it goes on to say that this part of the Benthall Centre on Fife Road is the less attractive part of it. So we actually consider that the proposal would enhance this part of the Benthall Centre and would certainly, in officers' opinion, harm the more important section over at the Wood Street side. So in terms of scale and massing, we consider, and with our urban design team, that it wouldn't harm the setting or the significance of the Benthall Centre. With regards to the design review panel, the design review panel did initially say that they questioned the size of the rooms, they had concerns, and I think they're concerns which we all have, but we don't have space standards to rely on. However, following the DRP and following discussions with the case officer, the room sizes were increased. Initially, I think they were all 16 square metres, but following discussions and negotiations, 8% were taken up to 24 square metres. So there were, and then we see that flexibility. So we did manage to get some larger rooms out of the developer following the DRP. I hope that answers all the questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Barry. I know you say larger, which is fair enough. Lorraine.
Thank you, Chair. So I wanted to ask about the accessible rooms and how accessible the building actually is. So I know there's 8% shown as accessible, which I think policy says 10%. But my concern is firstly about the communal areas and how accessible they will be for wheelchair users or those with disabilities, particularly the kitchen areas. I know that each room has its own sort of kitchenette type thing, but how accessible will the kitchen and communal areas be for those with disabilities? That's one point. The other point I had was regards to the cycle, the amount of cycle parking there is. I understand that the majority of it will be in the basement of the property, and that they would be using 11 of the Sheffield stands out on the footways or pavements in the area. One, they're not very secure if they're going to be used for the residents of this property. But the other thing, again, it comes back to those with disabilities. Another street part of furniture that's going to be put on quite a narrow area, narrow pavement area. Has case seal been referred to in any of this at all? And will they be, to ensure that any further street furniture is not going to be a hindrance to those with disabilities and sight issues, etc.? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Barry. I think I'll just pass over to you, Barry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I start with final questions and then work my way backwards or forwards, whichever direction. The Sheffield stands which are to be proposed externally, the location of those stands hasn't been decided yet. So the stands you see on the plans are the moped cycle at the rear. They exist, they're just being formalised. So certainly the cycle stands that will be provided on street, they will certainly be subject to scrutiny by the highways team. And indeed, if it is members' wish, we can involve KCIL to make sure that our key stakeholders are involved. And since Councillor Bamford was in the chair, we've worked far more closely with KCIL in dealing with major applications. And indeed, with Councillor Stewart as a disability champion, we've been working more closely with the disabled community to ensure that schemes meet the needs of the community. With regards to accessible space, again, we're in accessible units. We're in this situation where the policy requires 10% of residential units to be wheelchair accessible, but because these aren't residential units, C3 units, they would be non-residential, and therefore the policy requirement, well, sorry, there's no policy requirement. The building control requirement would be for 5%. However, we've secured 8% of the units. With regards to the functionality within the building itself, the application is included for step-free access throughout the building, so to ensure that the whole area is accessible to those in wheelchairs. If members are minded, and it's a very good point about the kitchen area, of course, the communal kitchen is going to be a key part of this if members grant permission, and to ensure accessibility for those in wheelchairs is also important. So this is a very good point. And if members were minded, I think applying such a condition to require that the communal facility does provide for a commensurate amount of space to be accessible in line with the number of bedrooms which are accessible. I think that is something that we would be able to impose, Mr. Chairman. I think those were the questions. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Barry. To save time later on, I think I think we should put a condition on. I'm not quite sure how we word it. You said about we're talking about if you like, the master chef. They've called it kitchen. It's not just a case of having enough space. It's making it so that there is probably a section of work surface at a lower level for a wheelchair user to be able to use it. So it's not just the space. It is. I'm not quite sure how you would word that succinctly, but you can get what I'm getting at. And if the committee's all in agreement, I think we should add that as a condition. I'd have to look to you, Barry, to see how we word that, because I don't want to be too specific, because if I was, I'd specify the wrong thing. But I just want to say that the kitchen should be usable by those in a wheelchair or something like that. That's probably not putting it very well, but is that okay, Barry?
What we could do, Mr. Chairman, is the legal agreement requires an operational management plan. Just looking for it now, operational management plan. So we can require that operational management plan includes details of and the provision of accessible cooking facilities for accessible needs in line with the plan to be submitted and approved in writing, as we would have. So it could be captured in the legal agreement for details to be submitted.
I think it's fine by me, yeah. Thank you, Barry. It's Roy next. Roy, for questions at the moment. Thanks, Roy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for pointing out that is questions at the moment, given that what I said last time. I would like to request, actually, could you allow Councillor Bailey to go before me, because mine actually is part question, part going on to comment. Yeah.
You can't hear me. I'm saying, yeah, that's absolutely fine. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So my question is really around the sort of business operating model of this co-living space, because we haven't really had one in just to see how it works, and sort of I suppose I'm asking because I'm sort of concerned about the tenure, security of tenure for any tenant in there. So it's sort of part hotel, is it part hotel, part residential, and if so, how long can somebody stay in there and constantly renew their contract to stay, or is there a limit on their staying, or can they be got rid of after a certain time? Also, who is renting out the units? Will that be, does the developer get an operator to do that for them, or or would be buying the whole building, or are they up for individual purchase and then renting them out. So does that make sense?
I think it does, Kim. Yeah, I mean, the report says that the minimum period for renting a unit is 3 months. It doesn't mention a maximum period. Had we had registered speakers, I might have asked the applicants actually if they had in mind a maximum.
Sorry to interrupt, but it means somebody wants to stay there for a year. Well, in that case, it's probably not designed for that.
I'm not sure about that. I think it is actually.
Having on the other things about having a minimum standard for on size of rooms for a living accommodation. If this is sort of below those standards, should we be allowing people to stay there for longer than a year?
I can't see. Sorry, I'm done. I mean, I can't see. I wouldn't want to say, oh, you can't stay there for longer than a year. If a person was happy living in one of these and wanted to continue doing so, I can't see. I wouldn't have any objection to them staying there for 2 years or 3 years even. I mean, I don't think
below the minimum standards.
It's not great. I'm going to turn to Barry because I'm not sure what. Have you got, Barry? Have you got what if this were a flat, what would the minimum standard bedroom size be, for example, for a single person bedroom?
So I'm on. So a bedroom would be 11 square meters. If you were so in a flatted accommodation, 11 square meters is a bedroom size. Now, what's important to note here is, of course, what they're trying to replace is people living in houses in multiple occupation. That's what their target audience is. Now, if you're living in a house in multiple occupation in Kingston, chances are it is possibly a 3-4 bed house, quite occasionally with the lounge converted into another bedroom, whereas you just have your bedroom and you might have access to a kitchen with some dining space. So if you were looking at that scenario compared to here, although it's only 16 square meters, here you do have a kitchenette in your room, you have an ensuite in your bedroom, you have a double bed, and you have space. But you also have access to those other facilities, the communal kitchen, screening room, the residence gym. So there is, when you compare it to what might be the alternative for HMO, housing multiple occupation, I would, in my opinion, say that this would provide a better standard of accommodation. And again, an accommodation which I think we might not have concerns if somebody wants to stay longer than the minimum 3-month period. Now, the 3-month period minimum is to prevent it becoming some type of short-term apart hotel type accommodation. It's to make sure that you can have some security, if you want to stay there for 3 months or stay there longer. In terms of the operator, it is proposed to be a single operator. 9 Yards Kingston is the proposed operator, and that would be tied up by condition or legal agreement. A condition of the legal agreement. So it'd be 9 Yards Kingston tied in by legal agreement, minimum of 3 months also tied in by legal agreement. But then there are other things which are provided which you might not get in that HMO, housing multiple occupation. Concierge facility, laundry drying facilities, bedding and linen changing and or room cleaning services. So you do get a lot of extra things in this accommodation. It is, as Councillor Cunningham's alluded to, something new for the borough because we don't have any, but they do work in other parts of the capital, Ealing, Wandsworth, for example. Incidentally, in Wandsworth, the bedroom sizes are smaller than the 16 square metres proposed in this scheme. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barry. I haven't forgotten you, Roy, but before we go on to discussion, and you might throw a question in as well, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to, as before, formally move the recommendation on pages A54 to A76, which is to permit this application, etc. And in doing so, I'm not saying that that's necessarily how I'm going to vote. I'm just doing it as a formality. Do we have a seconder?
Yes, I'm happy to second.
Thank you very much, Kim. So that's moved in second, and now we go to debate, and we'll go on to the vote. And I'm going to go to Roy first, and you can throw in a part question as you wish, Roy. Over to you, Roy.
That's very kind. Thank you, Chair. So my question slash comment is really to do with paragraph 11.3, which talks about, we've talked about this at some length already, about the £450,000 contribution in lieu of there being no affordable housing offered. Now, the question, the final sentence there, it says the contribution will be made in 2 installments. The first installment of 50% made at the beginning of the project, and the remaining 50% when there is 50% occupancy achieved. The first sort of part question I had for you, Mr. Lomax, was that I couldn't find this in the conditions, so I assume this is secured with a legal agreement.
I think the simple answer to that is yes, but yes.
Thank you. Given that is the case, Chair, and through you, Chair, I would have been much more comfortable and happier that if we got our final 50% of the 450,000 at the completion of the project, not when they occupy the building by 50%, because it almost suggests the council is at the mercy of the developer or at the success of the developer in this scheme. So if we are minded to support this, and in principle, I don't mind showing my hand right now, in principle, I'm supportive of this. If the committee is minded to support this, Mr. Chairman, through you, could I please ask for that to be strengthened to read that we get our final £225,000 at the completion of the building? Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. It doesn't seem unreasonable to me. We're not asking for 100% up front. We're asking for 50% on commencement and then 50% on completion. Is that not reasonable? And could we do that, Barry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, ordinarily, I would say that this would be a very wise choice. However, what we've got to remember is that the viability assessment says that this scheme should be delivering £0 in terms of affordable contribution. Now, one of the ways that we've managed to negotiate the money up front is to ensure that they pay half of it when they get some cash flow, hence the 50% occupation. If it's done at 50% of completion without occupation, there are then possible cash flow issues. So ordinarily, Councillor Rory is correct, we would have asked for it up front, but we've had to come to a negotiated position because we appreciate looking at their viability. They will need to have some cash flow, hence 50% occupation. Indeed, they wanted it to be higher than 50% occupation. They were looking for 90%, and we said, no, we'd want it earlier on. So this is how we've negotiated at 50% occupation, and that's for cash flow reasons. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Barry. I mean, given that explanation, I think, Roy, I'm inclined to say we leave it as it is. I get frustrated on applications when we approve them on this committee, and then months later, a decision notice hasn't been issued because there are negotiations or discussions, say, going on between the applicants and our brilliant officers over the legal agreements, and we can't get the legal agreement signed off, which means applications don't get a decision notice. And we know that we've got a need for housing in the borough, and it does delay things. So I take on board what you say, Roy, but I'm inclined to say we need to leave it as it is. But that's just my thought. Did you want to come back, Roy? If not, I'll go to Leslie. But
no, I'm actually okay with that. The only thing I would say is that it does bring into play what Councillor Cunningham said, that should these people not implement the scheme, then that 225,000 does remain unpaid until they do. But I accept your point entirely, and indeed, Mr. Lomax, that cash flow was one of the counter arguments they put forward. In good faith, I think I will accept that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Roy. I'm going to turn to Leslie, and then we'll probably go to the vote. But Leslie.
Yeah, it was just a quick question to Barry, really. What's the ballpark figure monthly rent on these units? Say the basic one, the smallest unit. Thank you.
Barry, I don't know.
I'm afraid I don't have it to hand. If I can find it, I'll have a look to see whether I can find it and come back possibly whilst you're concluding your debate. I'm busy looking at the chat function on my screen, hopefully the case officers listening and can very quickly tell me what the average rent is, but so far she isn't typing. So I will continue to look, and if I can find out, I will come back.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't think you're going to get a lot of time to come back. I did know at one point, but I hesitate to say a figure because if I say the wrong figure, I'm in a lot of trouble, I think. Lorraine's coming, so that might just give you a chance to. We are going to go to the vote shortly, but Lorraine, you might just help the officers out to give them a little bit of time to find that. Lorraine.
Thank you, Chair. I won't be long, so don't rely on me. So I just really wanted to say, I don't know how Councillor Mole feels, but I actually quite like the design of it, which we've not really touched on at all. I don't know that I just, particularly like my child to be living there and having their laundry washed, their bedding done only bi-weekly, but hey, each to their own. I would welcome the conditions being put in regarding the accessible kitchens and the conversations with KCIL to make sure that we're not over cluttering the streets, although additional trees I don't mind using as an additional clutter. That's absolutely fine. We can have more of those, please. But no, it was just a comment to say that I actually really quite like the design of the external facade. So yeah, that's I'll probably be minded to approve. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. I think we've agreed on the accessible kitchen, adding that into an existing condition. And the KCIL thing, I think that affects any condition or legal agreement. But officers, I truly hope will take on board when they come to it will go to our highways engineers, partly where those Sheffield stands are located, and I'm sure our planning officers will pass on to them that we want them to consult with KCIL. Yeah, thank you. Rebecca.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, my comment is, I guess it's similar to the other one, where I think we do need to, and I think it refers to what Barry was saying earlier, is that we have policy and we're here to apply the policy that is. I think that we would we've talked a lot about space standards, and I think it is right too, and it does raise concern, but it's not based in policy. Although I do also hear what has been described about comparing it more to a HMO. But I still think it's policy catching up with this new style, and this coming before maybe it's been fully worked out. I can see the benefit of this kind. I've spoken to a couple of residents about it who are like who have older children, kind of graduates, and they could see that they actually would really like it, like the ease of living, like the laundry being done, having that in betweenness. Design mixed. I think if it was, I think it is very tall for that area. I know that area well. I think it is very tall, and I think it will change, whether it's maybe it's subjective, whether it's for better or for worse. I don't dislike the colours or the materials. I think the height is a lot. Again, policy maybe. I don't think it contradicts policy. So I think overall, I think there are concerns about it, but I think that I can see that there could be a need. And the co-working space, you kind of look at post-COVID and think that actually might be a really well-used local resource. So yeah, I can't see any reasons to reject, and I really appreciate Councillor Dunstone pointing out the accessibility issues, because I think that's very important.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. I sort of feel the same way. I think I rather like the design. Actually, I'm not talking about room sizes. I'm talking about the overall look of it from outside, and even internally. I quite like the way it's set out with the co-working space, the restaurant, the communal or master chef kitchen and dining room. I like all that. I do think the room sizes are, I would have preferred it had they had a higher percentage, or even if some room sizes, some of the rooms were the 16 and a bit square meters, they could have had a few more, a larger size. I guess it all comes down to money in the end. Nevertheless, I don't think that's a reason to refuse it, so I should be supporting it. So I'm going to put this to the vote, and we're
Mr.
adding.
Chairman, sorry, as you mentioned money,
yeah,
Councillor Heap, it's around £275 a week for a standard unit, up to £300 for a larger unit, including gym and bills and all the other things to go with it.
225. So that would be 900 and a bit pounds per calendar. Well, £900 per 4 week month per 4 weekly month. Yeah. If I said it's 4 and a bit, but it's
slightly more.
£900 a month.
About
Sorry,
£1,200
did you say? Yeah. Did you say 225 or 275?
275. Sorry, 275.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. Why?
Yeah. So it's
275. Right.
Yes, 275. Sorry, it's my North Walian accent.
A week.
A week. Yeah.
A week.
So that's I'll get there. It's 1,100, isn't it? Is that right? It's just over 1,100 and a bit, just over 1,100 a month. It seems a lot to me, but because it doesn't, you've got then no. If you were in an HMO, you'd probably in addition for paying for your room, you've got to pay for your utilities, etc. Yeah. Whereas I'm assuming that this would include everything, including broadband, etc.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've got that information. I'm still going to put it to the vote with the slight amendment to the condition to bring in the accessible kitchen. I'm going to put it to the vote. So over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Chair. I will now call each councillor up in turn. Please can you indicate how you wish to vote by saying for, against or abstain. Please can you also confirm that you've been present for the duration of the meeting. Councillor Archer.
For, and I've been present throughout.
Councillor Aurora.
For, and I've been here throughout.
Councillor Bailey.
For, and I've been present throughout.
Councillor Bainan.
Yeah, I vote in favour. I have been present throughout the meeting. Thank you.
Councillor Cunningham.
For, and I have been present on video for the entire item.
Councillor Dunstone.
For, and I've been present throughout the meeting.
Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, I've been present throughout and I'm in favour.
Councillor Heap.
For, and I've been present at the meeting.
Councillor Mole.
I've been present and listening throughout and I vote for.
Councillor Self.
Thank you. I've been present throughout and I vote for.
So that's 10 in favour, Chair.
Thank you. So that is indeed unanimous. Thank you very much, everybody. That takes us on to urgent items authorised by the Chair, and you'll be pleased to know there are none. So that finally, I'd like to thank all members of the committee, all officers, and everybody that, and indeed our other contributors this evening, and everybody that's been watching on the YouTube channel. And with that, I close the meeting at 9:44. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.